Oliver West paused at the threshold of the cabin door, his heart pounding like a bass drum in his ears. He stood tall, well, as tall as a 14-year-old can manage, chin up, backpack slung over one shoulder, and a slim paperback science journal tucked under his arm. This was the first time he'd ever set foot in a first-class cabin, and every polished surface, every soft overhead light seemed to hum with possibilities. His grandmother, Dorothy West, had given him clear instructions before they left the curb of their home in Greenwich. "Stand straight, Oliver. Say thank you and please, like you mean it. Remember, you belong here as much as anyone." She'd pressed a crisp white handkerchief into his hand, her eyes gentle but firm. He tucked it into his pocket, drew a slow breath and stepped forward. The flight attendant at the door, a friendly-faced woman with impeccable posture, greeted them with a nod. Oliver managed a tight-lipped smile, hardly daring to blink for fear he'd miss something. The gentle curve of the armrest, the gleaming cutlery laid out on the tray table, even the faint aroma of fresh linens. He inhaled, and it smelled like promise. Mrs. West followed him down the aisle, her own bearing unhurried and confident. She might have been in her late 60s, but she walked as though she owned every step she took. The other passengers glanced up, some with curiosity, some with polite oiliness, but none spoke. Oliver felt their gazes brush past him like waves, and he straightened his shoulders in response. He remembered his grandmother's quiet words, "When they stare, let your posture do the talking." They slid into seats 2A and 2B. As he settled in, Oliver caught his reflection in the polished armrest. Dark hair cut neatly, button-down shirt crisp, khaki pants sharp at the crease. He tugged at his collar, an unconscious habit, and tried to quell the flutter in his stomach. He told himself this was more than just a reward for his science scholarship. It was an affirmation of who he was, a 14-year-old kid who loved physics and coding, not someone's afterthought in a crowded airport terminal. The flight attendant returned with menus bound in leather. Oliver watched her hand menus to each adult passenger, conceptually skipping over his seat. He swallowed hard and looked at his grandmother. Dorothy's eyes met his, steady and kind. Without a word, she extended her hand for a menu, and then, with deliberate calm, nudged it toward Oliver. The gesture was silent permission. "Take your place." Oliver reached out, fingertips brushing the cool cover. He opened it, scanning the gourmet options. Seared scallops, truffle risotto, herb-crusted lamb. His pulse slowed for a moment as he imagined tasting each one. This was a world far removed from the plastic trays and mystery meat of school cafeterias. He let himself smile. Every now and then he stole a glance at his grandmother, who was reviewing her own menu with a thoughtful expression. Dorothy had lived a life of service behind the scenes, managing contracts, negotiating terms, and ensuring standards across a dozen airports. But she rarely took the spotlight. Today she was content to be a passenger, allowing him his moment of quiet glory. Overhead, the captain's voice crackled, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 472, non-stop to Los Angeles. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet with an estimated flight time of 6 hours. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy our first-class amenities." Oliver's chest swelled with anticipation. He pressed his seatbelt snugly across his lap and exhaled, thinking, "I am here. I am exactly where I belong." He turned his attention back to the menu, noticing a small icon next to several dishes. A leaf next to the vegetarian options, a fish silhouette for the seafood plates. He imagined jotting down notes, perhaps asking the flight attendant a question, though he remembered his grandmother's advice about discretion. He kept his voice low, measured, polite. He had waited his whole life for this rare intersection of quiet dignity and soft luxury, and he was determined to savor every second. Beside him, Mrs. West closed her menu and folded her hands in her lap. He glanced at her, curious whether she would chime in or intervene on his behalf. She simply nodded, a tiny upturn at the corner of her mouth that said more than words ever could. In that silent exchange, Oliver found his courage. The cabin doors closed, and the hum of the engines began. He leaned back, his mind alive with possibilities. The journey ahead, the challenges of high school projects, the future inventions he might design. He felt a thrill of gratitude run through him, a recognition that privilege wasn't just handed out, but earned through excellence, respect, and a readiness to stand tall, even when no one was watching. As the aircraft taxied, Oliver took a moment to lock eyes with his grandmother. She raised an eyebrow, half challenge, half encouragement, and pressed her hand to his. He squeezed back, understanding that whatever happened next, they were in this together. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Oliver tucked his book of science puzzles into the seat back pocket, leaned his head against the plush headrest, and closed his eyes. He listened to the engine's spool, felt the gentle surge forward, and let himself drift on the promise of new horizons. A boy of 14, sitting straight in first class, poised to prove that respect isn't about age, background, or seat assignment. It's about knowing your worth and never settling for anything less than you deserve. Oliver West watched the flight attendant's back as she moved down the aisle, menus clutched in her gloved hands. He'd memorized every detail of that menu cover earlier. Its smooth leather finish, the embossed Liberty Sky logo, even the faint scratch near the spine where it had been handled 1,000 times. Now, as she passed row 2, she paused at every adult passenger, slid a menu into their hands, and smiled politely until she reached him. "Sir," Oliver said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. He kept his tone measured, respectful, exactly the way his grandmother had coached him. "Could I have a menu, please?" The flight attendant, a woman in her early 40s with neatly coiffed hair and a starched uniform, glanced down at his 14-year-old face. Her lips curved into a polite but dismissive smile. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, voice pitched just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is first class. Children don't need gourmet menus. We have a snack box in the back. Would you like one?" The words hung in the air like a weight. Oliver's stomach knotted, not because he was hungry, but because he felt the gaze of the entire cabin settle on him. A woman 2 rows back tapped her husband on the shoulder and whispered something that made him smirk. A businessman in the front corridor shook his head without looking up from his tablet. The flight attendant's words weren't just a refusal, they were a public declaration that Oliver didn't belong there. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, as though he understood. "Yes, thank you," he replied, voice steady. He turned back toward his grandmother, searching her eyes for guidance. Throughout this trip, Dorothy West had been his anchor. Her calm presence a constant reminder that dignity was not about force, but about grace under pressure. Mrs. West looked at him with a faint, reassuring smile and a slight lift of her chin. She had seen that look in his eyes before, a flash of hurt quickly hidden behind a mask of composure. He folded his hands in his lap, took a breath, and let it out in a controlled exhale. Whatever his grandmother's next move would be, he trusted her to carry it out with the precision and quiet power that defined the West family legacy. Behind him, Oliver heard the flight attendant speaking softly to her colleague, though he couldn't make out the words. He imagined her saying, "Kids these days," or "we can't spoil them." He pictured the small snack boxes waiting in the service cart, packaged in plastic, devoid of the elegance displayed on the menus he had hoped to peruse. Slowly, he surveyed his surroundings. The plush leather seats, the pristine silverware arranged like trophies, and the soft murmur of adult conversation, punctuated by the hum of the engines. He closed his eyes for a moment, picturing the cafeteria tray at school. Durable plastic, stainless steel utensils rattling against the tray's edges, fluorescent lights overhead. He'd spent countless lunch hours there, dreaming of a meal that tasted like more than cardboard and mystery meat. He let that memory ground him, letting the contrast sharpen his resolve. This humiliation would not define him. When he opened his eyes again, he caught sight of a fellow passenger shifting in her seat to film him on her phone. The screen glowed in the dimmed cabin light, a small rectangle capturing the moment. Oliver's fingers curled slightly around the armrest. He knew that this clip would travel beyond these walls, perhaps even become part of a larger conversation about service, class, or, he dared not think it, race, but he kept his face impassive. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. The flight attendant returned with a plastic snack box in her hand. She offered it to him with a brief nod. Oliver accepted it, placed it gently on his tray table, and managed a quiet, "Thank you." His tone was polite, but beneath it lay a quiet fire, an ember of hurt that refused to be snuffed out by condescension. He tore open the wrapper of the snack box and found a small cluster of grapes, a packet of salted crackers, and a miniature bottle of apple juice. It was hardly the Wagyu beef tartare he'd seen listed on the adult menu, but he took a bite of a grape, savoring its crisp sweetness anyway. He reminded himself that food was fuel, but respect was everything. And right now, respect was what he had been denied. Oliver glanced over at his grandmother. Dorothy sat upright, her expression unreadable. She had already noted the flight attendant's name, Tracy Malloy, and the aircraft type on her tablet. Her fingers tapped out a message, too quick for Oliver to see, but he trusted that she was at work behind the scenes. He felt a twinge of pride. He wasn't alone. Around him, the mood in the cabin shifted. A woman whispered to her partner, "Did you see how she treated that boy?" The man frowned, eyes lingering on Oliver's snack box. A few seats ahead, another passenger, young, probably in his 20s, put down his Kindle and watched quietly, lips pressed into a tight line. The sudden stillness felt like solidarity, as though the entire cabin had taken a collective breath in Oliver's defense. He took another grape, chewing slowly, keeping his posture straight. He thought, let them think what they want. He wasn't just any 14-year-old. He was Oliver West, science scholar, grandson of Dorothy West, and someone who had been taught to stand his ground without raising his voice. He closed his eyes again, ears attuned to the soft click of camera shutters and the distant whir of beverage carts. He could feel the story spreading, an unseen ripple moving through the cabin and beyond. Soon, the flight attendant moved on to the next row, offering gourmet menus to everyone except those she deemed children. Oliver didn't watch her. He watched his grandmother, who had leaned back in her seat, eyes closed as though resting, but with a tension in her jaw that spoke volumes. He knew she was waiting for the right moment. Every second that ticked by, he felt his own resolve hardening. When silence settled in the cabin, punctuated only by the soft lull of the engines, Oliver folded his napkin neatly and tucked it beside his snack box. He would not speak up now. That would be too obvious. He would wait as he had been taught and let silence do its work. Because the strongest statements are often the quietest, and often the hardest to ignore. And as the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, Oliver sat straight, hands folded, eyes forward, embodying calmness under fire. He was ready for whatever came next, ready to sit in the stillness until the moment his grandmother chose to rewrite the rules. Tracy Malloy glided down the aisle with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent over a decade tending to first-class cabins. She was the senior flight attendant on Flight 4722, a supervisor entrusted not just with safety but with upholding the airline's image. Her uniform was immaculate. Crisp white blouse, navy blazer with gold stripes at the cuffs, and a perfectly knotted silk scarf that fluttered just slightly as she moved. Her hair, pinned into a precise chignon, framed a face that could have been carved from marble. Beautiful, composed, but utterly unapproachable. As Tracy approached row 2, she exchanged a few curt nods with her junior attendants. Her eyes, cool and assessing, swept over each passenger before landing on Oliver West. He was sitting perfectly still, tiny plastic snack box in hand, and for a moment Tracy paused, as though sizing up a stray animal that had wandered into a lion's den. She tapped her clipboard, an official roster of service standards, and made a note. In her mind, she was doing more than enforcing policy. She was preserving order and professionalism. "Oliver?" she said, glancing at him by name, as if recalling a minor detail in a dossier. "I trust the snack box is sufficient?" Her tone was polite but carried an unmistakable edge, a reminder that she controlled every morsel in this cabin. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping so the passengers directly behind could hear, "We don't offer gourmet meals to children. It's our policy." Across the cabin, a ripple of murmured agreement broke out, some passengers nodding, others smirking. Tracy straightened and gave a small, satisfied nod. She was well aware that a flight attendant's authority in first class ran deep. She'd been through Liberty Sky's strict training program. Weeks of classes on etiquette, corporate branding, and crisis management. She'd learned how to read passengers' body language, how to anticipate their needs, and how to put anyone in their place when they stepped out of line. Oliver's stomach twisted, but he kept his face steady. He remembered what his grandmother had taught him. Dignity under pressure speaks louder than any protest. Still, every time Tracy's heels clicked on the aisle floor, his heart lurched. He watched as she signaled for a fresh bottle of sparkling water, then turned her attention back to him, as though he were a troublesome child rather than a young man quietly asserting his right to be here. Behind Tracy, a junior attendant fetched a snack trolley and began clearing away empty coffee cups. Tracy took her time inspecting the work, her gaze drifting back to Oliver as if ensuring the message had landed. Then she pivoted on one heel, returning to the front of the cabin with the faintest touch of triumph in her stride. Triumph in the knowledge that she'd reminded everyone who had the real power here. As the engines hummed steadily, Oliver exhaled slowly and closed his eyes for a moment. He felt a swell of anger but contained it, focusing instead on the quiet determination inside. He wasn't just sitting in first class, he was sitting tall in first class, knowing that respect wasn't dictated by age or by someone else's arbitrary rules. When he opened his eyes, Tracy was already directing her team to move on, to the next row, to the next set of unwitting victims, and Oliver allowed himself a single thought. She thinks she's in charge, but she hasn't met my grandma yet. Tracy Malloy returned to Oliver's row with the measured confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing. She'd already made her point once, denying him the first-class menu, but now she was back for the coup de grace. The overhead lights gleamed off her perfectly polished name badge as she walked past seat after seat of silent, watching passengers. When she reached 2A, her lips curved into a polite smile that didn't. "Sweetie," she began, louder than before, "I told you we don't serve those fancy meals to children. You'll spill truffle oil all over the carpets." Her tone was that of a teacher reprimanding a misbehaving student, except this was more akin to a royal decree. She tapped the laminated safety card in her hand as if the rule was immovable law. "Here," she added, producing a small pre-packaged snack bag. "This is what you get." The cabin grew uncomfortably quiet. Oliver's grandmother, Dorothy West, sat motionless beside him, her gaze fixed on the window, even though the view was simply clouds and sky. Oliver watched the snack bag drop onto his tray table like a judge's gavel slamming down on a verdict. He swallowed, eyes flicking up to meet Tracy's for just a fraction of a second before glancing away. There was a beat of tension so thick you could almost taste it. A passenger in 2C pressed record on her phone, the little red light blinking. Another leaned forward on her tray table, eyebrow raised. The hum of the engines felt distant now, drowned out by the electric charge of collective voyeurism. It was as if the entire first-class cabin had become a theater, and Oliver the unwilling star. Oliver's stomach nodded. He pictured the smooth surface of the truffle risotto on the adult menu, imagined its earthy aroma. Then he looked down at the meager snack bag, a handful of crackers that probably tasted like cardboard. He clenched his hands under the table, his knuckles whitening. His heart pounded, and for a fleeting moment, he considered speaking up, demanding his right as a first-class passenger, but he remembered his grandmother's words, "Still waters run deep." He drew in a slow breath and let it out silently. Behind Tracy, a murmur spread through the cabin. A man in business attire shook his head. "That's cold," he muttered to his partner. The partner shrugged, lips pressed tight. A woman in the back tapped her screen, presumably live streaming the spectacle. The flight attendant's uniform, once a symbol of hospitality, now seemed like armor in a hostile takeover. Tracy closed her eyes briefly, enjoying the discomfort she'd sown, before stepping back. She allowed a moment, just long enough, for the sting to register in every eye in the cabin, then pivoted on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking on the aisle floor like a metronome of humiliation. Oliver kept his eyes lowered. He felt a rush of heat to his cheeks. If there was one universal childhood shame, it was the feeling of being singled out, of standing out for all the wrong reasons. He pressed his palms against his temples, hoping to steady the whirlwind inside his head. The seatbelt strapped him in, an anchor in the storm. He took another breath and forced himself to sit upright, back straight, shoulders even. Exactly the posture his grandmother had drilled into him. Dorothy continued to stare at the sky outside. From Oliver's peripheral vision, it looked like calm acceptance. But he knew better. He could see the slight tension around her eyes, the way her fingers curled around the armrest. She was waiting, watching, calculating. He stole a glance at her, and she gave him the smallest nod. "Stay calm. I've got this." A low murmur hummed through the cabin as the snacks were passed out. Oliver unwrapped the bag and peeled back the plastic. He let the crackers crumble lightly over his tray table, an unspoken protest. He didn't eat. He studied the tiny golden squares that now lay in neat rows. On the other side of the cabin, a father leaned down to his daughter and whispered, "Did you see that? He's just a kid." The daughter's eyes were wide, the father's were troubled. It was validation in a way, confirmation that what had happened was wrong. But it also underscored the unfairness of it all. Oliver's chest tightened. He'd always known that privilege wasn't bestowed equally. As a kid from Greenwich, he'd enjoyed his share of opportunities, and he appreciated every one of them. But nothing had prepared him for the sting of being judged by someone else's notion of appropriate. It wasn't about the food. It was about the message. "You don't belong." He exhaled, let the air hiss through his teeth. He sat in silence, his gaze growing distant, thoughtful. The cabin lights dimmed as the seatbelt sign turned off. Freedom to move, freedom to act. But Oliver remained still. He was more dangerous that way. Silent, observing, refusing to give his tormentor the satisfaction of a reaction. His grandmother's lesson echoed. Strength isn't always loud. Meanwhile, Tracy returned to the service station at the front, offering the adult menus with extra flourish. She smoothed her skirt, adjusted her badge, and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. From her vantage point, she watched the cabin, her expression smug. She'd proven her point. She'd asserted her authority. She didn't notice the subtle shift in the cabin's energy, the way cameras flicked on, the way whispers grew into a soft chorus of disapproval. Oliver retrieved his paper napkin and draped it neatly beside his tray. He toyed with the corner, folding it into a small square. Then he placed it back exactly where it belonged. It was a tiny act of control in an otherwise powerless moment. He spotted the woman in 2C glancing at her phone, mouth parted slightly. He wondered if she'd share the video and how far it might go. In that moment, he realized that humiliation could be weaponized, but so could the truth. If she broadcast this, if the clip found an audience hungry for injustice, then something larger would shift. That thought steadied him. Tracy barked a quick instruction to her junior attendant and then turned her back on the cabin entirely. Oliver allowed himself a small, private smile. The real show was about to begin, and it wasn't happening under that uniformed veneer. It was hidden, quiet, and it would come soon enough. He leaned back into his seat, arms resting gently on the armrests, and closed his eyes. He could feel the pressure of every gaze, every camera lens, but he stayed still. He was saving his voice and his power for the moment that truly mattered, because he wasn't just a boy with crackers in a snack box. He was a West. And in silence, storms gather. And somewhere deep inside, Alia felt the first tremor of change, a promise that this wasn't the end. It was the moment before everything turned. Oliver shifted in his seat as a ripple of hushed laughter swept through the cabin. He'd barely picked at the crackers in his snack box when a man 2 rows back cleared his throat loudly and muttered, "They really let anyone into first class these days, huh?" His companion chuckled, eyes never leaving Oliver's face. A woman seated next to them turned to her husband, one eyebrow raised. "Must have been a comp," she whispered, as though sharing insider gossip. "You know how airlines give out free upgrades." Oliver's fingers crept to his collar, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time in as many minutes. The leather armrest beneath his elbow felt suddenly too smooth, too conspicuous. His cheeks flamed. Hot blood rushed from the base of his skull to the tips of his ears. He wanted nothing more than to slump into his seat and vanish into the plush carpeting. But when he dared to glance across at his grandmother, Dorothy West sat perfectly still, as composed as a marble statue with a soft silk scarf draped around her neck. Her gaze met his, steady and unblinking, and he drew in a slow breath. "I belong here," he told himself, repeating the mantra Dorothy had instilled in him since childhood. "I belong here." That thought, simple yet fierce, tugged at his spine and forced him to lift his chin. He folded his hands in his lap and let his shoulders drop back into the seat. His heartbeat settled from a frantic gallop to a measured trot. One of the junior flight attendants, stationed at the front, glanced back and offered Oliver's grandmother a sympathetic nod. Their eyes flicked to Oliver, a silent apology for the indignity he'd endured. It was a small gesture, easily missed if you weren't looking, but to Oliver, it felt like a lifeline. He realized a growing number of passengers had quietly averted their eyes from Tracy Malloy's display. Some tapped their screens, not to record, but to send quick text messages. "You won't believe this. What a jerk. Hope the kid's okay." Behind him, another whispered exchange drifted across the cabin. "He's probably the CO's kid," someone said, voice low. "Wouldn't surprise me." A ripple of disapproval followed, as though the notion of privilege had turned the tables on the flight attendant instead of the boy. Oliver's stomach clenched again, this time not from shame, but from a spark of vindication. He closed his eyes for a beat, remembering the letter of acceptance to the Summer Science Institute tucked in his backpack, remembering the time he spent coding late into the night, fueled by nothing but stubborn curiosity and lukewarm coffee, remembering the full scholarship he'd earned, the medals he'd won. "I belong here" wasn't just something his grandmother said. It was a fact, written in every achievement he'd piled up. He opened his eyes and caught Dorothy tapping her phone beneath the tray table. He didn't need to see the message. He knew it was on its way to wherever it mattered. She offered him a single, almost imperceptible nod, a promise that she was in control and that justice, quiet, unyielding justice, was coming. In that moment, Oliver's awareness sharpened. He noticed the way the cabin lights reflected off the polished cutlery, the way the overhead bins seemed to hang suspended in midair, the soft vibration of the engines that usually lulled him into daydreams. Tonight, those sounds and surfaces felt different, charged with anticipation, as if the whole plane were holding its breath. When the flight attendant reappeared at the front with another tray of gourmet silverware for the adults, Oliver didn't look away. He watched the gleam of her name badge, the precise stitch of her uniform, the tight set of her jaw. He saw her authority for what it was, a fragile illusion built on arbitrary rules. He sat up a little straighter, hands still folded, but fingers now clasped firmly. A hush settled in the cabin as people resumed whatever pretense of normal they could muster. Some closed their menus, others tucked them under their armrests. A young woman in the row ahead bit her lip, her eyes brimming with empathy. An older gentleman folded his newspaper slowly, giving Oliver's grandmother a silent salute, a nod of respect, solidarity. Oliver felt a chill run down his spine, not one of fear, but of possibility. Across from him, a mother whispered something to her child, pointing discreetly toward Tracy's station. The child's eyes widened, and the pair backed away slightly, as though they'd stumbled into a skirmish they didn't expect. That tiny moment of collective discomfort underlined the fragility of any single person's power when confronted by principle. Oliver leaned back, letting the faint hum of the cabin wash over him. He closed his eyes and envisioned the next steps. His grandmother's message reaching the control tower, the hush that would follow in the operations center, the series of silent dominoes ready to fall. He felt a calm certainty settle in his chest. He was a boy sitting in first class, yes, but he was also the grandson of the woman who held the levers of an entire aviation network. He caught Dorothy's eye one more time. She offered him a tiny, approving smile. No words were exchanged. There was no need. He knew that her next move would be decisive, and he trusted her implicitly. He let his shoulders relax fully, trusting that dignity and silence in tandem could cut deeper than any outburst. A flick of light signaled the flight attendant preparing to serve. Oliver opened his snack box once more, not out of hunger, but perhaps out of gratitude for the contrast it provided. He picked up a single grape, raised it halfway to his lips, and paused. Then he set it down, fingertips brushing the plastic lid. The cabin doors hadn't yet sealed him in. The engines hadn't yet roared to full power, but Oliver felt the momentum shift beneath him, the stirrings of something larger than the seat at his side. He straightened, folded his napkin, and placed it next to the snack box, exactly as he'd done before. And yet, nothing would ever be the same after this flight. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the armrests. He was silent, poised, unshakable. He belonged here, and soon enough everyone else would have no choice but to acknowledge it. Oliver folded his hands in his lap and let his gaze drift downward, focusing on the polished leather of his school shoes. He'd spent the previous evening carefully cleaning them, using his grandmother's old cloth and polish, stubbornly determined to look the part for today's flight. Now, those same shoes felt like symbols of every effort he'd made. All reduced to a dismissive shrug from Tracy Malloy, he could still taste the sharp sting of humiliation. The way the snack box had clattered onto his tray, the hush as every eye in first class turned toward him. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft whir of the engines and the distant clink of silverware. The cabin lights overhead glowed just bright enough for another passenger to snap a photo. or maybe even another live stream. But Oliver centered himself on the rhythm of his own breath, slow in and out, a quiet anchor in the chaos. He thought of home in Greenwich, leafy streets, the gentle neighborhood hum, the evenings spent tinkering with his science projects. That life felt miles away now, replaced by this strange, suspended world where every movement was watched. A soft hand touched his arm. He opened his eyes to find his grandmother, Dorothy West, offering him a small nod. Her expression was composed, almost serene, but her eyes held a fierce glint. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Oliver took that nod as permission to admit the hurt, then let it go. He pressed his palms gently against his thighs, shoving down the urge to clench his fists. Instead, he pictured the lessons she'd taught him over the years. You don't shout when someone steps on your toes. You stand your ground and let them stumble over their own mistakes. He raised his chin, focusing on a point just beyond the flight attendant's station. It wasn't defiance, exactly. It was the resolve that comes when you choose dignity over drama. He'd practiced this stance with his grandmother countless times in the study at home, where she'd guided him through the art of silent power. Straight back, squared shoulders, calm eyes. He felt the solidity of his own body, a reminder that respect was something you commanded, not begged for. A hush passed through the cabin as the snack boxes were cleared and fresh glasses of water were offered to the adults. Oliver noticed the flight attendant's back stiffen as she walked away. Perhaps sensing that her authority was unsteady, he allowed himself a small, private satisfaction at that thought, then reminded himself to stay poised. He closed his eyes again, inhaling the faint scent of lavender from his grandmother's scarf. That single aroma, comforting as a childhood blanket, filled him with warmth. He remembered her words after he lost his parents, how she'd taught him to carry his own light, no matter how dark the moment. Hold on to that light, she'd said, even when the world tries to dim it. Oliver pictured his grandmother in her element, the executive boardrooms, dozens of screens flickering with slot assignments and runway schedules, her calm voice directing it all. He imagined how, at any moment, she could reroute entire flights with a single call. That thought steadied him more than anything else, knowing that the woman beside him held more quiet power than any public tantrum could muster. He opened his eyes and surveyed the cabin one more time. A few passengers exchanged sympathetic glances. A couple tapped out quick messages on their phones, no doubt sharing the moment with friends. He saw the junior flight attendant avoid Tracy's glare, her hands trembling slightly as she passed menus along. Even that small tremor spoke volumes. The unspoken tension that comes when people know they're watching something wrong. Drawing in another breath, Oliver let gratitude wash over the sting of shame. Gratitude for the privilege of this journey, for the chance to learn and grow, and most of all, for the unwavering presence of Dorothy West. He felt a renewed sense of purpose settle in his chest. This was not just about being served a meal. It was about demanding recognition of his worth in every arena of life. He glanced at the message notification briefly, lighting up his grandmother's tablet screen. "Protocol ready," it read. She tucked the tablet back into her briefcase, and Oliver could almost hear the gears turning behind her calm exterior. He reached out and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. She met his gaze again, that same nod of silent solidarity. The seatbelt sign chimed off and the cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling permission to move. But Oliver remained seated, still as a statue, embodying the tranquility he'd cultivated. He didn't need to be the first to speak or act. He would wait for the moment his grandmother deemed right. In that time, his quiet strength would speak louder than any shout. As he leaned back, Oliver allowed his shoulders to relax fully. The moment of deepest hurt had passed, replaced by a calm determination unlike anything he'd felt before. He wasn't just a boy in first class. He was Oliver West, grandson of the woman who controlled 12 major airports, a young man who had learned that silence and poise could build storms. Closing his eyes one final time, he let the engine's murmur lull him into readiness. He was ready. Ready for whatever came next, and sure that, when the time came, he'd be sitting perfectly still, exuding the quiet power of the West legacy. Oliver felt the faint vibration in his grandmother's lap as the tablet on her knee buzzed. He glanced at her, eyes wide under the soft first-class lighting. Dorothy West's fingers hovered over the screen, then tapped once. The display changed. Charter 12 protocol activated, Liberty skies suspended at all 12 NAAO airports. Charter signature required in 24 hours or access revoked permanently. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A flight attendant glanced at the screen over Dorothy's shoulder, then whispered to a colleague. Nearby passengers exchanged curious glances, their phones lighting up with news alerts. Oliver kept his face calm, but inside, his heart thumped with a mix of awe and pride. He knew every second counted now. Across the country, the NAAO Operations Center erupted into motion. Dozens of large monitors blinked red with Liberty Skies logo crossed out. A terse bulletin scrolled. Effective immediately, Liberty Sky Airlines is prohibited from using runways, gates, and ground services at JFK, LAX, O'Hare, DFW, ATL, SEA, BOS, MIA, DNS, SFO, LAS, and IAD. All other carriers must affirm acceptance of the national passenger charter within 24 hours to maintain access. Analysts and air traffic controllers stared at their screens in stunned silence. A senior NAAO director cleared her throat, tapped her earpiece, and announced, "Notify all airports. Issue statement at once." Within moments, push alerts pinged into inboxes at every major airline's operations hub. Back in Liberty Sky's gleaming headquarters, the mood was immediate panic. In the main control room, wall-to-wall screens showed slot-denied alerts cascading down lists of flights bound for the affected hubs. The operations manager, mid-30s and usually unflappable, paced in front of a bank of terminals. Beneath a silent neon logo, technicians frantically refreshed maps that now glowed with red X's. Grown men in crisp suits whispered urgent questions. "Can we appeal? How long until this reverses?" No one had answers. Upstairs, the CEO's private office door swung open. He entered to find his CFO and COO waiting, faces drawn. On the polished mahogany desk lay the official NAAO communique. The CEO read it in near silence, lips pressed tight. 30 seconds passed, then he looked up. "Get me the board," he barked. "Now." The staff nodded, visibly shaking. A crisis that had seemed theoretical a week ago was unfolding in real time. Meanwhile, market data feeds lit up. Liberty Sky's stock ticker tumbled on screens in New York and Chicago. Traders muttered, "Intraday losses near 19%, and downgrade incoming." Phones rang off the hook as institutional investors scrambled to cut exposure. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, Liberty Sky was the fastest falling airline on the market that day. Back in seat 2A, Oliver sat perfectly still. He could hear the collective murmur of astonishment, an undercurrent of disbelief lacing the cabin air. A timid clap broke out from a group of business travelers who spotted Dorothy's name as the protocol originator. Oliver dared a small smile. This was the moment his grandmother's silent power had become undeniable. At the front service station, Tracy Malloy and her crew huddled, trying to interpret incoming messages flashing on their handheld devices. Their orderly routine had been shattered. Polished menus lay forgotten on carts. Tracy's smile faltered as she glanced toward Oliver and Dorothy. For the first time, she looked small. Dorothy gently tapped her tablet again, sealing the directive. She leaned back, eyes on the overhead compartment lights. The cabin lights dimmed briefly as a pre-programmed announcement began. Ladies and gentlemen, important operational updates will be communicated shortly. A hush fell. First-class passengers exchanged knowing looks. Oliver's chest swelled. He knew this wasn't about retribution. It was about rewriting the rules, ensuring that no one else, child or adult, would be subjected to such public humiliation. He drew a steadying breath and folded his hands, embodying the same quiet strength his grandmother exuded. The tablet chirped once more. Charter acceptance logged, 22 carriers within 12 hours. Liberty Sky remains suspended. Dorothy gave him a brief nod, permission granted for surety to settle in. Oliver leaned back and closed his eyes, feeling the engine's steady hum and the gentle climb of the aircraft. This wasn't just a flight anymore. It was the turning point, where dignity rose and injustice fell, in silence louder than any outburst. And as the plane soared toward Los Angeles, Oliver West sat in first class, content in the knowledge that the silent storm had only just begun. The announcement at the NAAOA Operations Center hit like a storm surge. Dozens of monitors lining the walls instantly flashed red, each one emblazoned with "Access Denied." Liberty Sky Airlines over the names of the 12 major hubs: JFK, JFA, LAX, O'Hare, DFW, ATL, SEA, BOS, MIA, DIN, SFO, LAS, and IAD. An almost audible hush fell over the dozens of air traffic controllers and contract managers gathered around long tables dotted with coffee cups and scattered briefing papers. A senior director keyed her mic and spoke with measured urgency. All field offices confirm receipt of the suspension order. Notify local carriers. They have 24 hours to sign the national passenger charter or lose access permanently. Within seconds, that directive rippled outward. Push alerts pinged onto the smartphones of airline executives in Chicago, New York, and Dallas. Emails arrived in ops managers' inboxes from coast to coast. Somewhere in a Delta briefing room, a chief operations officer tapped out a rapid reply: "Charter acceptance confirmed. Standing by for contract." Less than 2 minutes later, United's legal team faxed back a signed copy of the charter, and Southwest's CEO acknowledged the new rules in a terse memo. Meanwhile, Liberty Sky's account managers stared at their blank inbox. No acceptance, just a flood of error messages. Back at Liberty Sky's gleaming downtown headquarters, the mood cracked open like a shattered windshield. In the main control room, where screens normally displayed departure boards, gate assignments, and runway traffic, rows of alarms blinked ominously. "Slot denied" cascaded down each terminal directory, and technicians tapped furiously at keyboards, trying to override an order that simply couldn't be reversed. Fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors as the operations manager, known for her calm under pressure, grabbed a headset and barked. "Status update, tell me we can appeal this." A junior engineer's voice crackled through. "We can't override now, authority, ma'am. Their protocol is final." Upstairs, the CEO's office door swung open. He entered to find his CFO pacing, phone pressed against her ear. She covered the mouthpiece and hissed, "They're going to downgrade our credit rating if we don't resolve this by tomorrow morning." The CEO slid behind his mahogany desk, eyes scanning the official communique, still glowing on his desktop. Immediate suspension of all Liberty Sky operations at 12 major airports, effective now. Charter acceptance required within 24 hours or permanent revocation. He pressed a button on his phone. "Get the board on an emergency call. Now." Within minutes, the Liberty Sky board convened via video link. Faces appeared in small windows. Investors in London, executives in Miami, legal counsel in Seattle. A murmur of disbelief filled the virtual room as the CEO summarized the crisis. One after another, board members voiced urgent questions. Can we negotiate a waiver? What about customer compensation? How do we contain the PR fallout? No one had a ready answer, and the silence that followed was deafening. By mid-afternoon, the fallout reached Wall Street. Trading floors erupted as Liberty Sky's ticker plunged. Screens scrolled headlines. Liberty Sky stock tumbles 19% intraday after NAAO suspension. Investors warn of severe cash flow disruption. Analysts predict $17.80 M daily revenue loss without key slots. Floor traders shouted orders, their voices cutting through the din of ring bells and ticker updates. One broker shook his head at his client. This is unprecedented. Losing 12 airports overnight? That's a $17,800,000 0 cents hit every 24 hours, minimum. Phones lit up as institutional investors raced to sell off shares. The CEO's face, frozen on a financial news broadcast, looked up from talking points that now rang hollow. At airports across the nation, passengers checked flight boards in growing confusion. At Boston Logan, a cluster of travelers reading the overhead display turned pale when they saw flight canceled, Liberty Sky 472. One man swore under his breath. A businesswoman tapped her app and stared at the service unavailable message. In Atlanta, a young mother fretted over her missing connecting flight. She flagged down an agent only to be told, "I'm sorry, ma'am, Liberty Sky is suspended here indefinitely." A teenager leaned on the counter, scrolling memes and tweets. "Serve with respect" was trending nationally. Meanwhile, regional news outlets scrambled to capture footage of grounded jets on the tarmac. A local reporter at LAX narrated live as a Liberty Sky Airbus sat idle, its door closed and engine silent. Passengers disembarked with resigned faces. Some clutched carry-ons, others talked into their phones, sharing video clips of the suspended flight. Some tweets mocked the airline's arrogance. Others cheered Dorothy West's decisive action. "Little boy denied gourmet meal? Big airlines pay the price," read one headline. Back in the air, Oliver West felt a faint thrill of vindication as murmurs filled the first-class cabin. He watched fellow passengers reading news on tablets and phones, their eyebrows lifting as they absorbed the magnitude of the suspension. A woman in row 3 tapped the screen and whispered to her friend, "I can't believe it. They actually did it." His grandmother's tablet buzzed with confirmation. 22 carriers had already signed the charter. She didn't look up at the commotion. She inhaled slowly, as though savoring the quiet before the crescendo. Oliver's chest swelled with pride. The tension that had gripped him, all the humiliation, all the restraint, had rippled outward into something far bigger than his own discomfort. He thought of the NAAO's guiding principle: respect is not earned by rules alone, but by actions when no one is watching. He sat straighter, folding his hands in his lap, and felt the power of silent justice settle around him like a shield. As the cabin lights dimmed for the dinner service, now served only to the few guests who'd signed the new charter, Oliver closed his eyes and reflected. This wasn't vengeance. It was recalibration. The airline world had been jolted into accountability not by headlines alone, but by a single unspoken message. Treat every passenger with dignity, or lose everything. And in that moment, high above the clouds, Oliver understood the greatest lesson of all. Quiet resolve can trigger the loudest revolution. Tracy Malloy's heart was still pounding when the cabin door hissed open at LAX. She'd just finished her final tray pickup. Tray tables cleared, trash stowed, and signature "Thank you for flying Liberty Sky" murmured to the last passenger. Now, as she stepped onto the jet bridge, 2 stern-faced ground staff flanked her. "Miss Malloy, please come with us," one of them said, his voice low and urgent. There was no warmth in his tone, only the clipped efficiency that comes when someone knows they carry bad news. Tracy swallowed, nodding. She squared her shoulders, plastered on a professional smile, and followed them into the bustling terminal. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out. Over 200 missed calls, dozens of texts. The first unopened notification was a news alert. Viral video. Flight attendant denies first-class meal to child. Liberty Sky reels. The headline blurred as her vision tunneled. She braced herself against the wall. Moments later, she was ushered into a sleek Liberty Sky conference room, the one with glass walls overlooking the tarmac, where executives held their power lunches. The long mahogany table was empty except for 2 chairs, one for her, one for the CEO. A single monitor glowed on the far wall. "Sit," commanded a voice. Tracy turned to see her manager, Marisol Chen, already seated. Marisol's face was a mask, cool and unreadable, but her eyes were dark with disappointment. Tracy eased into the chair, trembling ever so slightly. She placed her polished uniform cap on her lap, smoothing the creases in her skirt. The door clicked shut behind her. Marisol tapped a remote. The monitor flickered and then filled with the 43-second clip. Tracy's crisp, "Kids don't need gourmet menus" line, Oliver's small snack box, and the boy's wide, hurt eyes as he turned away. The footage was sharp, every passenger's reaction, every moment of the flight attendant's authority in full display. Beneath the video, a ticker scrolled. 4.2 M views in 7 hours. Serve with respect, trending nationwide. Tracy felt her stomach twist. She'd seen viral clips before, celebrity meltdowns, airline mishaps, but never of her. Never of herself. She swallowed hard, but her throat felt dry. Marisol clicked off the video. She faced Tracy with a cool clarity. "Do you know who that boy is?" Tracy's chest tightened. She summoned a puzzled look. I served a snack box, but he's not just any passenger," Marisol said, voice soft but cutting. "He's Oliver West. His grandmother is Dorothy West, the chairperson of the National Aviation Access Organization." Marisol let that sink in, emphasis on every word. "The same NAAO that handles contracts for 12 of our busiest airports." Tracy's fingers went numb. Dorothy West. The name alone could freeze an executive's blood. She'd heard rumors of West's quiet influence, how a single directive could reroute hundreds of flights, ground fleets, and cost airlines millions. She'd never believed the stories. Until now. Marisol leaned forward. "Liberty Sky has lost access to those airports, effective immediately." She glanced at a tablet on the table, where the Charter 12 protocol mandate blinked in red. Revenue loss is projected at $17,800,000, 0 cents per day. Our stock has plummeted nearly 19%. Our PR team is in freefall. Legal wants to file an immediate injunction to reinstate access, if that's even possible. Tracy blinked as if emerging from water. "But I was following policy." Her voice felt small. "I was enforcing the dress code." Marisol's eyes flared. "That dress code doesn't exist. You improvised. Publicly, during peak boarding, in first class. You humiliated a minor, on video, for the world to see." Tracy shook her head, desperation creeping into her tone. I didn't realize who he was. I thought it was standard procedure. And now we're paying for it," Marisol said, pressing her palms flat on the table. "I'm sorry, Tracy. This is a career-ending incident." Tracy's mouth went dry. The word career echoed in her mind. For 15 years, she'd built her reputation on poise, on knowing exactly how to manage every cabin situation. Now, it was slipping through her fingers like sand. A knock at the door interrupted them. A junior HR officer entered, holding a manila envelope. She set it on the table before Tracy. The CEO, a tall, lean man with silvering hair, stood in the doorway. His eyes were unreadable as he watched Tracy. Without a word, he nodded to the HR officer, who slipped away. The CEO strode to the table and opened the envelope. Inside was an official letter. Immediate suspension for conduct unbecoming an airline representative. Tracy stared at it as though it were written in a foreign language. The CEO cleared his throat. "This was your decision," he said quietly, voice even. "You created a moment we can't unsee. Our customers won't forget, and our partners won't forgive. I've signed this. Effective now, you are relieved of duty pending our internal review. Your name will appear on the airline's ethics watch list, which we share with other carriers." Tracy lifted her gaze, tears pricking at her eyes. "Am I fired?" The question felt absurd, hopeless, like asking if the sun would rise tomorrow. The CEO's lips curved downward. "Yes." Marisol reached across the table and took the letter away, leaving Tracy alone with her uniform cap and an ache in her chest. The CEO turned and walked away without another word. Marisol followed. Tracy sat there, unmoored, as the boardroom door closed with a soft click that sounded like the final curtain. Outside, the terminal noise felt muted. She touched the name badge on her blazer one last time, then removed it, placing it beside her cap. She rose slowly, smoothing her hair. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and there was no going back. As Tracy stepped into the corridor, she passed a flight crew member who dropped her gaze, unable to meet Tracy's eyes. The crowd beyond the glass walls, passengers streaming off the plane, looked for any sign of normalcy. But Tracy knew nothing about her would ever feel normal again. She walked to the service elevator, chest tight. With every floor it descended, she felt the weight of her mistake and the quiet power of a single child's dignity pressing down on her. It was a reckoning, complete and irrevocable, delivered in the silence that spoke louder than any apology. The moment the aircraft touched down at LAX, the tiny cabin of news vans and camera crews outside the jet bridge already throbbed with activity. By the time Oliver West and his grandmother descended the air stair, local affiliates were rolling footage of the first-class cabin. Oliver, seated perfectly erect, cheeks still faintly flushed, hands folded on his lap, a voiceover intoned. "Flight attendant denies gourmet meal to 14-year-old in first class. Airline suspended at 12 major airports." Back home, cable news channels cut into their afternoon programming. On CNN, the chyron read, "Liberty Sky Airlines grounded nationwide after racially charged incident." Anchor Valerie Cruz leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Tonight, a story of privilege, prejudice, and power. A 14-year-old boy is denied a meal in first class simply for being a child. His grandmother, head of the National Aviation Access Organization, responds by suspending an entire airline's access to key hubs. We'll break down what this means for air travel and civil rights." Over on MSNBC, a panel of commentators debated the fallout. One guest, a veteran aviation analyst, shook his head. "We've never seen anything like this. Airlines operate on razor-thin margins. Losing 12 airports overnight could cost Liberty Sky nearly $18 million per day. But the bigger story is this boy's dignity and the industry's reckoning with systemic bias." Across the internet, the hashtag #ServeWithRespect surged. Twitter lit up as users shared the 43-second clip. Tracy Malloy's smooth refusal, Oliver's unflinching calm, and the snack box delivered in place of a gourmet menu. Retweets exploded, parents expressed outrage, tech executives praised Dorothy's decisive action, and thousands simply wrote, Give that boy his seat." On TikTok, a short remix went viral, footage of Oliver at the moment of denial, overlaid with the text, "When they say you don't belong, but you do." Within 24 hours, that remix racked up 15 million views. Teenagers across the country recorded themselves holding up pretzel bags in solidarity, captioned, "If he gets a pretzel, we all do." The trend even inspired a fundraiser for a youth scholarship in Oliver's name. Within hours, it had raised over $200,000, 0 cents. Bloggers chimed in with think pieces. One headline read, "Why silent resistance is the new civil rights weapon," drawing parallels between Oliver's dignity and historic acts of nonviolent protest. Another post, on a major parenting website, urged mothers and fathers to talk to their kids about what respect really means. In the comments, hundreds shared childhood memories of feeling judged or excluded, and many vowed never to let their own children face the same indignity. Meanwhile, at Liberty Sky's headquarters, the corporate communications team was scrambling. A pre-recorded statement from CEO Robert Langford went live on their website and social channels. "We apologize unreservedly for the incident on Flight 474D. Our policies must reflect respect for every passenger, regardless of age or attire. We are reviewing training protocols and committing to diversity and inclusion workshops for all staff." But it was too little, too late. News outlets pointed out that every other major carrier had already signed the new national passenger charter. Liberty Sky remained the lone holdout. A banner on their own apology page read, "We've heard you," but underneath, a scrolling ticker still displayed, "Access denied, all 12 airports." On passenger forums and travel industry podcasts, analysts debated whether Liberty Sky could recover. "They've become synonymous with bias," one host commented. In travel, perception is everything. When your brand becomes the story for discrimination, loyalty evaporates. Frequent flyers began swapping tips on where to reroute connections and how to avoid the scandal-plagued airline. But not everyone lauded Dorothy West's move. A handful of op-eds accused her of abusing power, arguing that no one individual should have the authority to ground an entire airline. Online, critics labeled her action unchecked corporate vengeance. Yet those voices were drowned out by millions more championing Oliver's right to be treated with dignity and celebrating a new standard for how airlines should serve every passenger. Inside a quiet VIP lounge at LAX, Oliver sat at a low table, a cup of herbal tea in front of him. He fingered the stem of the glass, watching steam spiral upward. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself to relax. His grandmother sat beside him, reading a printout of trending news alerts. She looked up and offered him a small, proud smile. He met her gaze, curiosity glowing in his eyes. "Do you think they're listening now?" he asked softly. Dorothy set aside the printout and folded her hands. "I believe they can't ignore it any longer," she said, voice calm but firm. "This isn't just about one airline. It's about changing an entire culture." Oliver nodded, absorbing the gravity of the moment. He thought back to the cafeteria trays of his middle school and the countless times he'd felt out of place. Now, in this sleek lounge overlooking the runway, he felt seen, truly seen, for the first time. A news alert pinged on Dorothy's phone. She checked it and then stood, extending a hand to Oliver. "Shall we go?" she asked. He rose, squared his shoulders, and followed her toward the exit. As they walked past a cluster of reporters, cameras clicked eagerly. Oliver stayed silent, head held high, embodying the quiet resolve that had started this revolution. On the screens above the terminal gates, "Serve with respect" scrolled alongside flight departures. Travelers paused to read, nodding in approval before continuing on their way. In that moment, Oliver realized that respect, once denied, could never be taken away again. And as he and his grandmother stepped into the stream of passengers, they did so not just as individuals, but as heralds of a new era in aviation. One where dignity commands its own seat in first class. Dorothy West stepped up to the lectern in the grand hall of the International Aviation Forum, its arched ceiling and rows of polished seats filled with airline executives, regulators, and media. A hush fell as she adjusted the microphone, her posture calm and poised, exactly the way she'd taught Oliver to carry himself. She looked out over the audience, her silver hair pulled back in a simple knot, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady but warm, "we teach children to remain silent when they are humiliated. We tell them to be polite, to swallow their pain, to keep their heads down. But we have never taught those of us in positions of power the same lesson. The responsibility to speak up, to own our mistakes, to ensure dignity for every passenger, no matter their age, attire, or background." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dorothy paused, letting the idea sink in. She continued, "Today, we redefine that responsibility. From this moment forward, any act of discrimination in our cabins is not merely a lapse in courtesy, it is a breach of trust that will be met with transparent accountability. Every report will be public, every investigation clear, and every airline held to the highest standard of respect." She glanced to the side, catching Oliver's eye as he sat among invited families in the front row. He offered her a small, confident nod. Proof that respect, once wielded, passes from one generation to the next. Dorothy raised her hand slightly, palm open, as if offering a gift. "Let us build an industry where dignity is not reserved for the privileged few, but guaranteed for all. Let every child know they belong in first class as surely as any CEO. And let every adult understand that power without empathy is power wasted." When she finished, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, then rose as one. Applause thundered through the hall, a standing ovation that carried beyond the rafters. Executives waved to colleagues, some dabbing at tears. Reporters exchanged glances of wonder. On one side, a young airline CEO pressed record on his phone. On the other, an elderly pilot stood slowly, clapping until his hands ached. As the ovation wound down, Dorothy stepped back, offering one final nod. She and Oliver shared a quiet smile. In that moment, they both understood. Respect had taken its rightful place at the center of aviation's future, not with a shout, but with the unbreakable power of truth, spoken softly. Oliver West settled into Seat 2A on his next flight, an unremarkable Tuesday morning service from Boston to Chicago. But this time, everything felt different. The cabin lights were bright, the overhead bins closed neatly, and the hum of the engines carried a new sense of purpose. He glanced across the aisle. Every passenger from rows 1 through 4 looked relaxed, chatting freely with flight attendants who moved down the aisle with genuine warmth. A familiar face appeared at his side, a young attendant, the one who had stood quietly by when Tracy Malloy condemned him to that snack box. Today she approached with a genuine smile and extended a leather-bound menu. "Good morning, Mr. West," she said, voice warm. "May I offer you today's first-class selections?" Oliver's chest swelled. He took the menu, fingertips brushing the embossed airline logo, and managed a quiet, "Thank you." He looked up at his grandmother, Dorothy West, still composed, still dignified, but now there was something almost playful in her eyes. She simply inclined her head, as though to say, "You earned this." He opened the menu to find the same gourmet choices he'd once only dreamed of. Wild mushroom ravioli, citrus-glazed duck breast, and an artisanal cheese plate. He traced the descriptions with his eyes and let himself feel gratitude for the privilege of choice. No longer a mere spectator, but a welcomed guest. Across the cabin, the atmosphere felt light. A mother leaned over to help her young daughter read the menu. A businessman raised his glass in a silent toast to his partner. A couple in the back laughed softly at something the attendant had said. Even the junior flight attendants moved with an air of genuine pride, offering water refills and extra pillows without the slightest hesitation. Oliver closed the menu and placed it gently on his tray. He looked out the window at the runway below, sun glinting off the tarmac. Memories of the last flight, the public humiliation, the hushed cabin, the snack box, replayed for a moment, but each image felt distant now. He took a steadying breath and straightened his back, just as his grandmother had taught him. Beside him, Dorothy folded her hands in her lap and observed the cabin with satisfaction. She could have intervened publicly, made a scene in the terminal, or commanded headlines. Instead, she had chosen a quieter victory, rewriting the industry's rules so that no child, no passenger, would ever face that kind of shame again. When the first course arrived, Oliver savored each bite, the rich umami of mushrooms, the delicate pastry of a small tartlet, the crisp freshness of seasonal greens. It wasn't just about the flavors, it was about what they represented: recognition, respect, and the promise that equality and hospitality was not negotiable. As the flight progressed, crew members passed by and offered friendly nods. One of the senior attendants, once Tracy's protege, stopped by Oliver's seat and whispered, "Thank you for sitting here. You changed everything." Oliver smiled, the words settling over him like a soft blanket. At cruising altitude, Dorothy leaned over. "How is it?" she asked, voice soft. Oliver looked at his menu, then back at her. "It's perfect," he said. "I feel welcome." She smiled. That was the point. The cabin began its descent into Chicago. Oliver tucked the menu into his briefcase, straightened his school blazer, and sat tall. No need to rehearse any posture. He had claimed his place, and in doing so, had helped claim the place of every passenger who deserved to be treated with dignity. When the wheels kissed the runway, Oliver closed his eyes briefly and allowed himself one small, private victory lap in his mind. Then he opened them to see his grandmother nodding in approval. No fanfare, no speeches, just the quiet satisfaction of a battle won, and the knowledge that tomorrow's passengers would board with a little more dignity than yesterday's. And as the cabin doors opened, Oliver West stepped into the jet bridge not just as a boy in seat 2A, but as a symbol of change, proof that respect, once demanded, becomes a standard.